we go into, we tell the people, lock the door, leave the place. It isn't even worth it for an exorcist to go in there.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back once again to another episode of the Warren Files. This is new for us. This is the first time we've done back-to-back episodes to kick off the season. I think it's and it's a good 1-2 punch. We have another really cool guest tonight. Stephanie, do you want to go over his background, or do you want me to?
You go ahead and do it.
Okay, so tonight we have Loyd Auerbach. He's got a master's degree in parapsychology. He's a paranormal investigator. He's on the board of directors at the Rhine Research Center, professor at multiple colleges, offers a ton of online courses. He has authored many books. People refer to him as Professor Paranormal because he's probably one of the smarter guys that's out there doing this. Don't you think, Stephanie?
Oh yeah, with all his years of experience, he's got 43 years experience investigating.
Yep.
Which is more than anybody I've ever become acquainted with.
Yep.
So really, somebody just has a vault of knowledge.
Yes.
When it comes to paranormal investigating.
Yep. And we have all kinds of questions tonight. And again, we welcome your questions in the comments. We will get to them as soon as we can, but let's bring them on because no one wants to listen to me talk. We'd rather have our guest on. So welcome, Loyd. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks.
Good. So again, thank you for being on tonight. It's, one thing. So when I started doing research about you, I read in your bio, and I'm just going to read the statement that you made. Over the last several years, I have been working with others to try to bring some sense of connection between the amateur paranormal community and those in the scientific field of parapsychology, which I hope will lead to a greater support for the field. And that is such a great statement. It's awesome to have scientific minded people in this because otherwise, we're all looking at orb videos and things like that, on Facebook pages and listening to people tell them that, I see a demonic face in that orb and that they need to sell their house or burn it or something like that. So, you want to talk about that statement a little bit. What are you doing to try and get more scientific people involved in the paranormal community or sway the amateurs to come that way?
I've been teaching courses in parapsychology, including field investigation, for many years. I was teaching them here in the Bay Area locally, live and in person for a while in the early 2000s through about 2018. But we started at the Rhine Research Center. We started an education center back around 2013. And I've been teaching courses since around that time, online courses. And we have been promoting them. We have certificate programs in field investigations and paranormal investigations, kind of like two levels in laboratory research, in just parapsychology in general and psychic functioning, things like that. So it's really been an educational outreach. I also do a lot of podcasts like this. I grew up in a media family. My father and my uncle were both in television. Another uncle was in radio. So I really have been around the interview process around this, and I've been doing television since the early 80s. Actually, I did some TV and radio when I was a kid too.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what my whole perspective has been using the media to outreach, but also education to outreach. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of actual, or almost no colleges at all that offer any courses that are of note anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a whole different issue. And for a while, I was reaching out to the conferences too. And I did speak at a few of them in the early 2000s and discovered that once the TV celebrities came in, I was, butkus.
Yes. We definitely experience that when people apply. Like you can tell, who watches Ghost Adventures and things like that, because, when you ask them questions, you get that answer. So,
well, and a lot of those conferences are really fan conventions. They're not, about the substance of the material. So,
And I do, I'll be honest, I do like some of the shows, but, we all got to take them for what they're worth, and it's entertainment. It's not for education. So so if someone wanted to take an online course in parapsychology or something like that, where would they go?
Well, they should go to the Rhine Education Center, which is on the crawl. I can see rhineedu.org. We are actually going to be starting our classes for the fall session on October 9th. So we're coming up real quick. I am teaching 2 classes. We do have one of my former students who has his own very popular podcast, Jimmy Aiken, is doing a course, the Introduction to Parapsychology course, which is a great place to start.
Yeah.
But our courses are designed, for the most part, to be taken even out of order, even if whether you're going for a certificate or not. We have people who are taking them for grades because they want to apply for a certification. And then other people, I'd say at least half of the people that take my classes or any of our classes are there for fun. They just want to learn, and they don't necessarily participate, but that's okay as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm teaching a course that's looking at deeply looking at certain cases, a number of my cases very, very deeply, and then looking at a few seminal cases, very important cases in the field of parapsychology, as well as how we've gathered information about people's experiences since the 1880s.
Yeah.
The other one I'm teaching is an advanced field investigations class, which does have some degree of prerequisite to it, but that can include communicating with me and showing me that you have some knowledge.
Yeah.
So
that's actually an interesting question too. And Stephanie, we'll definitely get to yours because you had a lot too, but this just jumped in my head. It's so let's say a client reaches out to you. What does it take to get you to work with a client, and what is your process like from start to finish? Like,
well, I'm going to try and make this short a little bit. All right. Yep. So basically the first thing that I would do, well, I got to know where they are first. That's important.
Yeah. Yep.
I can say that me personally, I don't, because we don't get paid to travel around the country.
Yep.
Fortunately, I have a lot of former students who know their stuff that I can refer to. That's one of the benefits of these courses.
Yeah.
So the process is really first a pre-interview, and that's either done by phone or by Zoom. I have people who refuse to do that. They only want to do it by email, and you can't get enough information via email.
Right.
You can't get a feel for what's really going on with the folks. You certainly can't get a feel if they're a little off kilter.
That's right.
Otherwise, and you really can't ask the questions you need to ask, which include things like, is stuff happening? Like now, I mean, I get calls over the years. I've gotten calls from people who had really, really good experiences, ghostly experiences, encounters that I would say that if they had happened recently, that'd be great. But they happened 5 years ago and nothing's happened since then.
Yeah.
There's this idea on TV, I think, that if you had an experience in your house is haunted, period. Yeah. And it stays haunted. And that's certainly not the case, even for the public sites, for that matter. So once we do the pre-interview, then it's a logistical issue. Is it, can I physically do this? Is it close enough, or do I need to send it off to someone else?
Yeah.
And the investigative process itself on the site visit is focused mainly on 2 things: the physical environment, which sometimes can lead to other explanations than the paranormal. And the other is the whole interview process. We really have to zero in on what's been happening, talk to all the witnesses. And then not everybody who works with me does work with psychics and mediums, but because I've been blessed in some respects with a lot of good people that I've learned to work with, I can often bring somebody in to get their opinion on things as well.
Yeah. That's one advantage too that we have is we have a lot of very good psychics in the foundation. So, that's definitely a big help. But I'm going to let Stephanie ask a couple of the questions that she wanted to ask.
Well, I'm going to start off with an explanation on what is a ghost and have we proven the existence of ghosts or spirits. I know people like to call them by several things.
Yeah, and there's interchangeable terms that people deal with. If you talk to mediums, a ghost is a spirit, it is a consciousness. It's someone's consciousness after death, but they have not transitioned to the next level. They're kind of stuck here, or whatever that means. Whereas a spirit is someone on the other side. There, in many respects, we look at consciousness. What is it that makes you you? What is the thing that is you? It used to be called human personality in the early days. And that survives the death of the body. This is the kind of the definition of an apparition or a ghost, and is capable of interacting with us, with living people. Otherwise, there could be lots of ghosts around, but if they're not interacting and letting us know that they're here, we don't know. So for me, to define this, an apparition, that's the term we like to use, or ghost, and the word ghost has a lot of charge to it. But an apparition is the consciousness of someone that has survived the death of the body and is capable of interacting. And it is that which is perceived by the living, not seen, heard, felt, smelled, or whatever with the physical senses, but it's our perceptions pick up that conscious, either as a visual and auditory sensation signal. We pick up physical sensations, but it's not a physical thing any more than the air is physical or light is physical in the way it affects us directly, especially light. I think energy is more like it in that way. But it's really about perception. So there's two things here that are really important with ghosts. One is they see us with ESP. They don't have physical senses. So they have to use non-sensory perception. That's ESP. And we see them, if we see them at all, with ESP, because our eyes are very clearly not seeing them. It's not an optical phenomena or an acoustical phenomena. And now your second question, proof. Can you prove that consciousness exists?
Right.
Science hasn't gotten there yet.
Yeah, no.
There's not even an agreed upon definition for consciousness within the sciences. So the answer to that is no. We can't, until we can prove the thing that we assume is in the body and know what it is. It's very difficult to prove that consciousness without a body exists from any perspective. And that's partly because we haven't gotten ghosts participate in laboratory research.
Yeah, exactly. They just don't show up. They're so unreliable. It's
that's it. How do you hold them to a schedule?
Right. But that's something that I've compared it to for a long time with people, is that, a lot of what we do in the paranormal is very comparable to faith, almost like a religion. Like a lot of people, they can't prove the existence of God. They just know he exists. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of things in science. Science really, hard science, actual science itself doesn't deal with proof.
Okay.
It deals with evidence.
Yes.
Acceptance.
Yep.
So, right now there's research that is indicating that there's basically four main forces in nature, physical forces. And there's evidence in physics that's showing there might be a fifth force, which is unheard of. There are recent articles in the last couple of weeks that I've seen reinterpreting Newton's law of inertia, which has been, after several hundred years, it apparently was misinterpreted. So if this is what we're holding as standards and we're reinterpreting the standards or finding new things, how do you say that we can't prove this? But we can't prove it now.
Do you think that they will ever come up with, because have you ever heard of this? It's a machine called I think it's called the Squid. It detects the energy in a human body. I think that's what this was something I came across a long time ago.
There are devices now. There's a lot more talk today than there was, let's say, 30 years ago, bioenergy or a biofield, a human biofield, which is, it's really interesting. You talk to people who are paranormal total disbelievers, and and I know people love to talk about energy in the world. Yeah. We don't know that ghosts are made of energy versus, say, electrical field or something like that. We don't know. We don't know what that is. But people have said, well, my body gives off energy. This is what healers work with, for example, right? People talk about auras, and that is probably a perception of an actual field.
Oh,
energy that
going in and out a little bit. We lost you.
yeah.
Oh, I hope it...
Let me hang on one second. Let me try
Okay.
something. I'm gonna try it. Let's see. Plugging an Ethernet cable in. My Wi-Fi should have been okay, but
yeah,
hopefully this will take care of it.
StreamYard's funny with Wi-Fi. It at least when you host the show, it definitely says to plug it in. But
yeah. So anyway, I was saying that our bodies give off heat energy, which is energy. Mm-hmm. So if you say that our bodies don't give off energy,
right,
that body would have to be dead.
Yeah.
Dead cold, right?
Yeah.
We have magnetic fields around us. Mm-hmm. We give off a lot of different types of energy, and we give off biophotons. The Rhine Research Center is doing research on how the brain gives off biophotons, which is something that's being done in a lot of fields of science. Mm-hmm. And our brains give off particles of light, which cannot be seen. You'd need a huge amount, even more than what they're getting with healers in an incredibly darkened room, where it goes from 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 per second to up to 1 million for one of the practitioners. Mm. That's still not visible. But there are these devices that are being built to detect the energy fields around a human being, and using that possibly for diagnostics, which is really kind of cool.
I think that machine that I was referring to, that was its purpose, was to it's so that, like, they're proving that you can energetically heal somebody, is what they're trying to do with this machine.
That's the idea. Whether you can prove that you can heal. There's a question about healing as to what's actually the process is.
Right. Yep.
And whether or not, because I know Reiki practitioners talk about energy exchange, and they're giving off heat, certainly, which feels good. They may be increasing the magnetic field. Certainly healers who are being tested at the Rhine Center are giving off huge spikes in biophotons, which is probably not the only energy they're giving off. So there's something to be said for all of this. And we're just at the beginning of understanding any of this at this point.
Yep. Stephanie, what you got?
Yeah. So speaking of apparitions, in your book, I'm reading your book right here, Ghost Hunting, How to Investigate the Paranormal. Amazing book. For those who are just getting into paranormal investigations, I definitely recommend this book. Even if you're a seasoned investigator, I highly recommend this book too, because it goes back to a lot of the things that maybe we have forgotten, that we haven't thought of yet, but this is a great resource. In your book, you mentioned that apparitions can be two things. They can be a spirit of the dead, a ghost of the dead, or a living apparition. And so, I feel like that the living apparition part is something that we don't visit as investigators. When people come to us and they're telling us their experiences, we automatically go to a spirit of the dead or a ghost of the dead. We don't connect that to somebody that's alive. And I wanted to ask you, what types of apparitions would you look for and connect them to that of a living person? Are there characteristics? Is an OBE considered an apparition of the living?
So that, first of all, that category goes back again to the early days of the Society for Psychical Research and the American Society for Psychical Research. There was even a book that focuses quite a bit on a number of those cases, included called Phantasms of the Living, which is back in print. You can find it on Amazon, and you can get it free on the Internet Archive. So when people go out of body, on occasion, when they travel someplace, they have their out-of-body experience, and in their experience, they go to visit somebody, and that person sees them, even have a conversation with them. And in some reported instances, that person didn't even know the person was out of body because they looked very solid until their friend disappeared from their sight, just like, boom, gone. And then the person who traveled remembers this experience and then checks it out with their friend, and lo and behold, that friend actually did see them. So it's connected sometimes to out of body, and those out of body experiences happen when you're asleep, as well as spontaneous experiences of out of body. That includes near death experiences, which may have an out of body experience with that particular situation. And then there's another subcategory of the living apparitions, which relates to crisis. It's called a crisis apparition, and that is when someone typically sees or hears the voice of a loved one. Usually it's a relative, a loved one, who turns out to be in a real problem accident. They were in an accident, they're trapped, or in a really deep, bad psychological place. And that person doesn't remember going out of their body, but they appear to the individual, to the witness, usually looking like they're in pain or in distress, which is a signal to that person, oh my God, I got to get in touch with this person. There are, I think that there's a movie actually called Charlie St. Cloud with Zac Efron, based on a young adult novel, which has both of the dead and an apparition of the living in it. And it's worth watching that for that. There's a couple of movies. One of them is Just Like Heaven with Reese Witherspoon. She's in a coma and she appears in her old apartment quite some time later. And Mark Ruffalo thinks she's a ghost, except her body's in a coma and she doesn't even know she's still alive. So there's some really good media images like that, but that's what we're talking about.
Would you consider remote viewing a type of living apparition?
Generally, in remote viewing, the reviewer does not appear to someone. And, an out-of-body experience is a different experience than what happens with remote viewing. With remote viewing, you don't even sense that you have left your body. You don't have any psychological sensation that I'm out of body or anything like that. You're just getting information from that location. It's kind of like the difference between watching a football game live and being in the stadium.
Yeah.
So being in the stadium is out of body. Watching it live, you're remote viewing. TV is remote viewing. This is remote viewing right now.
I actually, we did on a location one time. We tried to, granted, we were not using the scientific method in any way, shape, or form, but we tried to kind of prove remote viewing. I took some equipment and some stuff and some people into the basement, and we had one of the psychics in a completely other end of the building. And I wanted him to set off some of the equipment. And then it turns out he saw one of the people react in a way, because the one guy started yelling and freaking out, just all excited. And so when I came upstairs out of the basement after this experiment, he goes, so why was Fox all excited? So, I mean, it's like he definitely, I can't prove he was there, but he definitely, gave me an indication that, okay, he was definitely there and he witnessed that guy act like that and asked me about it afterwards.
The thing to do is to ask that psychic then at that point, did you go out of body or did you just pick it up?
He says he actually describes that he went out of his body and walked into the basement.
Yeah, so that's an important question to actually ask in these situations. You mentioned not using the scientific method. That actually is an application of the scientific method. As a starting point. I will say that not all the cases, in fact, most of my residential cases are applied science, not really using the scientific method.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's because it would be highly unethical to put people through a scientific methodology ringer if they're asking for help.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Yep. But another thing that he did too, and granted, REM pods can go off randomly for anything, but he did say that he was trying to stand on the red circle, being the REM pod, and the REM pod did go off a few times while we were down there. So, I mean, there's just a couple, I call it interesting, not proof, but I mean, it was an interesting little experiment thing that we did. So,
yeah. And in that kind of situation, the thing to do is timing wise is you have to have a way of communicating. So, that the moment the person says, the psychic says, I'm standing on that pod.
Yeah.
It's the same moment it actually goes off.
Yep. I dropped the ball on having like a timer, because we did film him and we filmed down where we were, and I should have had some kind of timer, on both of them. So I dropped the ball on that one. Go ahead, Stephanie. I kind of stepped on your toes. Sorry.
No, you're not. Not at all. Not at all. So I was debating on which question to ask you first, but I'm going to jump to poltergeist activity. This is something that comes up quite a few times in our cases. people will blame experiences on poltergeist, and their explanation of a poltergeist is some strong entity that is in the house or the space, and it's just throwing everything. Things are falling and flying through the air. We believe, and we always try to explain to our clients, that poltergeist activity is caused by a living agent.
Right.
And I have even heard some people say that it's most likely caused by a teenage girl. How true is that?
Okay. So when we have cases that are purely physical, no matter what that physical activity, kind of how it takes shape, there's no indication of an entity at all. We look towards the idea of living agent. The model of the poltergeist that most parapsychologists work from, at least certainly in the United States, is that physical activity by itself that centers around living people is coming from living people. And that goes back to 1958. That's where the model started, although there's some very early on with Nandor Fodor, who came up with that initial idea. And we look at, it's a detective game. You're trying to figure out who is the common denominator. If there's one person there all the time when the physical phenomena happens, or if it requires all members of the family to generate that stress that actually sets it off, which makes it much more difficult to figure out if there's a single agent or multiple for that. But it's an unconscious psychokinetic, that's the mind over matter effect. It's chaos. That does indicate the unconscious, by the way. Apparitions, ghosts tend to be a lot more purposeful and not like just, so we have this model of living people typically under stress, although there's a percent related real correlation to epilepsy or epileptic-like activity in the frontal lobes of the brain, the temporal lobes. And we have to look at that as a possibility. And the most important thing, as one of the reasons why we know pretty well it's not an actual entity, is you can get it to stop just by figuring out who the agent is and getting them to admit that to accept that they're doing it. Or teaching them to do PK consciously, or getting them to do physical activity to blow off steam. All of those things stop. You don't need any rituals. You don't need to talk to a ghost. I brought mediums who say, yeah, there's nobody here. Oh, over there. They do a reading on the people. The teenage girl thing is a stereotype. There's probably about 60% of the poltergeist agents tend to be adolescents, meaning like 11 years old to about 24, 25. Teenage years are in there. The teenage girl thing comes from the movie and the book Carrie. Stephen King set the tone, just like The Shining set the tone for a lot of other things.
Yeah.
I've had poltergeist agents as old. I had one woman who was 80.
Oh, wow.
So it's not normally. I mean, my very first case was turned out to be a poltergeist case. We weren't sure what it was to begin with because from other factors going on. There was a teenage girl. And of course, right off the bat, you think it's the teenage girl. It was the mother.
Here's a good question related to that. Jen wants to know, with poltergeist activity, do we know how often the physical agent has psychic abilities?
It's a good question.
Well, I mean, that is technically an unconscious psychic ability. Psychokinesis is that. It is not the case typically that people think of themselves as being psychic at all. In fact, we have to, when we're doing those interviews to find out, we do ask, have you had other psychic experiences? Have you, what kind of experiences? The agents typically are not aware that they could have done that consciously. And many of them don't have they don't report anything else psychic otherwise. But we've had some situations over the years with agents who, when you get them to accept that they can do this and you work with them a little bit, they can do PK, not in the big scale, because that's really unconscious. They can do PK on a much smaller scale for a while until they get bored with it, which usually does happen. The big scale stuff, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to doing PK. It's really hard to get people past these ingrained ideas that is impossible.
Yeah.
Now I have friends who are psychics, And they're always telling me that when they walk into a room, their electronics are going crazy, or they can't wear watches because they break the
Right.
watches. Is that a form of PK energy going on there?
Yeah, it tends to be a form of PK. I mean, electronics do react, especially to stress. But part of, and I have a good friend who's a medium who she
Oh,
hopefully it's okay now.
it's getting better.
There you go.
Oh, now
Maybe.
you're froze.
Now,
Oh, shoot. You're coming back.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, clear. Okay. Oh, shoot.
Friends, I'm talking about her. This is a medium. She's a psychic and medium. She's had a real problem with Zoom until the pandemic. She was forced into that. Does great on the phone. She prefers not to see people unless she's in person with them. And so she screws up computers quite a bit. Another friend of mine, I worked for years, and I worked with a guy named Martin Caden in the 1990s, who was the creator of the $6 Million Man. He was a science fiction and science writer. He could do PK, but the problem was that he still was writing his books on typewriters, electric typewriters, not on a computer. They didn't have a computer in the home. And we were doing a workshop at one point at the University of Nebraska, and I was sitting in the. I was taking notes. We lost it.
It keeps going in and out.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know if it's me or what.
I don't know.
I
was taking notes on my it was an early MacBook Pro, and his wife is sitting next to me, and she said, "You shouldn't be doing that." I said, "Why?" I said, "Because as soon as Marty notices you're working on a computer, it's going to crash." And sure enough, it crashed. And I was fortunately able to get the data off. It was an early computer, so it only had 40 megs of data on it.
Oh, gosh.
How long ago? That was the 90s. Yeah. I had an external drive. It was on the external drive. And then the thing completely crashed. I sent it off to Apple for repair. And they sent me back a brand new hard drive it was not even under warranty. They said they had never seen an internal structure.
That's crazy.
The hard drive was completely messed up in a way that you would not be able to do. Anyway, so people do affect electronics, and some of our poltergeist cases are strictly related to electronics.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you can hear me, but is there some poltergeist activity or PK activity that results in physical harm?
It's pretty rare when that happens, because we attack, whether it is from a ghost or from a living person. And here's the thing: psychic healing doesn't work on someone who doesn't want to be healed or doesn't believe. If you're not playing, even in your belief, it's really hard to hurt you. That doesn't mean that you can't duck into the path of a flying object.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It does happen. People, things are flying around. People get hit in that way, but it's really, really rare for PK to actually do something dramatic to someone in any way, shape, or form.
Another misconception too that I found in doing the cases that I've done is a lot of people believe that a poltergeist is a next level spirit that you're dealing with. Like it's worse. Like it may be slightly below demonic or something like that. Like it's in a class that makes it more evil. And it's like there's a big misunderstanding about what poltergeist activity actually is.
I think it starts really with the word itself, which traces back to at least the 16th century in Germany, if not longer than that. And it was a term that was applied to situations where there was purely physical activity. So they felt it was a noisy or physical ghost, noisy ghost in that way. But that definition to a lot of people persists, even though many words changed their definitions over time as we, lightning has became something different. The word computer, before even a computer was a person who did math.
Yeah.
There were banks, there were codes, and they were all human. So we have different terms that change meaning. The word telepathy, when it was first introduced, means feeling at a distance, but that's not what it became.
Yeah,
it really became something different.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your experience, how does self-manifestation differ from PK?
Well, it's what kind of manifestation you're talking about. If you want to say that moving an object is a manifestation, then that is PK, purely. It really depends. There's this idea that persists and in folklore around the world, and there's something to be said for it in certain ways of a thought form, and that we can create something if we believe in it enough that might be seen or perceived or experienced by someone else. In some respects, a haunting, a residual haunting, is that. It is something we leave behind. There are places around the world, the Tibetans believe in something called a tulpa, which if you believe in something and you really put enough mental energy into it, it not only comes to existence like a spirit, but it also is self-determining. It becomes self-aware. We haven't seen any real evidence of that, but there's some really interesting pieces of how people have created hauntings of them for themselves or of themselves, kind of projected things. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of something, actually Hans Holzer wrote about this in the 60s, a place in New York City. It's 12 Gay Street in Greenwich Village. It's a building that has since the 1800s was broken up into two buildings, and it's a haunted place, a couple of different apartments there. And in the 1960s, when he investigated it, he brought in a medium, and there were several things going on. It was mostly residual of a kind of a party thing going on downstairs. But then there was a man in evening clothes who dissolved into a shadowy figure in the upstairs apartment. Didn't really do much more than walking towards the direction where the person was seated. And it turned out, because someone, a very famous author in certain circles, spoke up, a guy named Walter B. Gibson, who was a magician, but also actually wrote books on professional books or pro books on the paranormal. Gibson and Zlitzka wrote books on the occult, and in learning to be psychic, he believed in psychic ability. He also was the creator of the shadow, as in who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. Mm. And he lived in that apartment and wrote the last few shadow novels. And when he heard about the description, he basically said, oh, sometimes I put too much mental energy into Lamont Cranston in the shadow. And I guess he showed up.
That's very interesting.
So he created a thought form.
Yeah.
It's fortunate that the shadow in that particular incident didn't start laughing, because that would have really freaked people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which reminds me of the Slender Man. I don't know if it's folklore, but it's a fairly new type of I call it a story that just came about not too long ago, and it's just it has taken on a mind of its own, a life of its own, and now there are people that believe that there is an actual thing called Slender Man. And,
that would be a thought form, yeah.
That's something too, though. That's kind of
if that has happened, that would be a thought. That the fact that go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You cut out again, but that's something too that I think that's kind of faded away. Like I really don't hear people talk about the Slender Man thing anymore. Like that. Well, seems like that was a very short, but yeah, there for a while, everybody was talking about it
until the next movie comes out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's you have to kind of look at this and say it really depends on what people's beliefs are and whether they're interpreting things differently. And if you saw a really skinny ghost, would you call that the Slender Man?
Yep.
It's different cultures have their different folklore, and it's hard to know whether any of that ever got manifested as a thought form, whether that was kind of transmitted to people or not. I spoke to a woman. I was on a TV show locally in the 1990s. They had a bunch of channelers, and like one channeled someone from Ireland from the 17th century, another channeled an alien, another channeled a group spirit. I'm sitting next to a woman who was very, very quiet during the channeling session. And it turned out she channeled Athena. And so I asked her during commercial, I said, so are you the Greek goddess Athena? And the response was really cool. She said, there never were Greek gods, but the belief in the Greek gods and what they represented became thought forms. I am the thought form representing wisdom of Athena. And I thought that was really kind of cool.
That is cool
to hear.
I'm trying to read into the comments here a little bit. Stephanie, you got more questions, I know. If
I do. So in your book, I've just kind of been bouncing around between the different chapters, and I have found one statement that I thought was really interesting. And you said that apparitions have learned to move things. Now, in your experience, does that mean that they inherently are limited in their capabilities? In that, I call it the spirit realm or the quantum realm, whatever it is, and to lead off to that question, when activity or perceived activity ramps up, is that possibly a ghost that has learned to do more, just showing us what they can do now?
Yeah. So first, when you die, you don't suddenly become smart. You don't suddenly get the ability to know the future. Apparently, you don't suddenly get access to all the psychic powers that somebody could possibly have. You do have access because you need it. Is perception is there? That's ESP, but we don't do PK most of the time in our lives when we're alive. So think about it this way: you have to think about, if you're dead, you don't have a body. You have to think about, how would I move something? How would I cause something to move? For quite a while, because our psychology doesn't seem to change, our personality doesn't seem to change when we die either, based on the experience that people report and everything else. So you'd have to get settled with the fact you don't have a physical body to reach out and grab something. And now you got to figure out, how am I going to do that? And, and again, going back to the media, there's a really good example in the movie Ghost,
just thinking of that.
Crazy, where he can't do any of that. And he finds a ghost in the subway in New York who's walking down the subway train car, knocking, and he asked the guy, how are you doing that? He says, well, you don't have a body. You have to think. You have to really make that move. And that requires getting past your disbelief that's even possible, even when you don't have a body, apparently. So for things to start moving, and they move in accordance with the apparition's story and personality. And often any sight witnesses see them doing it to some extent, or perceive them doing it. And it rarely gets nasty. Certainly it doesn't get nasty. It can get messy sometimes when they're trying to get your attention. And I usually see an escalation in situations where the people have been ignoring the ghost completely. And at some level, it becomes like a 2-year-old who's been ignored. And there's a bit of a tantrum that happens. But all you need to do is give attention to that, and that changes the tone. And just imagine if you could really have a good communication with that ghost and ask him to do things for you, such as we've seen. I had one instance at a place here in the Bay Area where the ghost actually put on a song on the jukebox that was not plugged in.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's
well,
cool.
It was crazier because it was Spirits in the Material World by the Police.
Oh.
It was a ghost. He was definitely a ghost with a good sense of humor. We actually knew that already. So,
Well, let's take a question from the comments here. So, what are your thoughts about paranormal tourism locations? Like, is it possible that so many people coming through these locations with various levels of fear and energy, is it possible those hauntings are now just the products of that?
I would say absolutely. Emotion gets left behind all the time. And I think that because living people create hauntings, dead people don't. No. So all of that is going to have both an effect and probably a timestamp, which means that
He's slowly coming back.
Did you lose me again?
Yep, you're back now.
All right. So what I'm saying is that the more these places people have the investigations, I'm using air quotes here, in the dark at night, especially when people freak themselves out, the more likely that imprint is going to be time-stamped to that period under those conditions. So during the day should be fine because most ghost hunters don't do anything during the day.
Yeah.
Even though actual hauntings happen during the day.
Now, I've always remembered this story that I heard you tell a couple of years back. And living people can leave imprints. It doesn't have to always be something that has passed on to leave an imprint.
Right.
And I know that you tell this story much better than I do, but it was about a couple that moved into a house, and every single night around the same time, they heard some noises. Could you please tell the audience a little bit about that?
Well, first, let me preface this by saying that that no haunting has to revolve or have anything to do with death at all. I mean, many times the haunting has been around long enough that the people who left it behind have died. Just like I can watch the original Frankenstein from 1931. Nobody involved in that movie is still alive. I don't think. They made the movie. They made the movie when they were alive. We can watch the movie. They're all dead. That doesn't mean that was a recording of dead people, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So this was one of my earlier cases. We got a call at a research place. It was the American Society for Psychical Research. It was in Upper Westchester County. I lived in Westchester County. So I took the case rather than our research director and his folks actually doing it first. And the couple reported noises that was waking them up every night between close to 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there. It was never exactly 3 o'clock, but it was around there. And it was every night except for Monday night, Sunday night to Monday morning, which itself was interesting. When I asked on the phone, because I did the pre-interview, what kind of noises, I had to ask a lot of times, what kind of noise? And finally, the guy said, okay, it's two people doing it. And the wife, who's on an extension, says, yes, it's two people making love. They're making love loudly. There was also some jabs at him because she kept on saying, making love loudly, and sound like they're really having a good time, Howard. That kind of thing. So I arranged to go up there a little bit later. It was like a Friday late afternoon. They came home from work early. The house was 5.5 years old. The development was only about 6 years old altogether. So it was a very new area. There'd never been anything. I checked with the Historical Society. No colonial activity, no Revolutionary War activity, which was not unusual in Westchester County. There might have been Native American activity, but there was no signs of anything at all there. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they told me that it had been going on since pretty much after they moved in about 5 or 6 months before. And they had learned how to turn it off. They would take turns getting up in the middle of the night when this woke them up. It was so loud, it woke them up. There was a second master suite next to theirs. And they would go into the hallway. They could hear the noises in the hallway. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the other room, it stopped. And they could go back to sleep. So we decided that they knew some of their neighbors, but we decided we'd start talking to neighbors about the previous owners. Now, they already knew that the previous owners were in their late 20s, had lived there, had bought the house in their mid-20s. They were stockbrokers. They did so well, they moved into Manhattan. Still alive, in other words. Nobody else had lived there. And so we started talking to neighbors. The couple was okay saying, okay, our house is haunted. We fudged what was happening because they were embarrassed. We finally talked to the next door neighbor who knew the previous couple really well. In fact, he gave me the guy's phone number. And he said, well, and I finally asked him, was there anything weird about this couple at all? Did they have big parties? Was there anything going on? Because I didn't tell him exactly what it was. And he said, well, the only thing I can tell you that's a little out of the ordinary, I haven't even mentioned it to him because I don't want to embarrass him. But in the spring and fall, when our windows are open, you don't have the air conditioning or the heating on, every once in a while, they would wake my wife and I up from that window over there. And he the bedroom. And I said, well, how does that wake you up? And he said, well, they're clearly making love loud. Their sex was really loud and raucous. Yeah. Probably the whole neighborhood heard it.
Wow.
All right.
That's
so
crazy.
I called the following Monday morning, I called the guy. I introduced myself and he's like, well, what are you calling me for? Like American Society for Psychical Research. I said, okay. So the couple who bought your house feel that the house is haunted. That's what I said. I wanted to see how you react. And his reaction was very defensive. He said, well, if they can't get out of the deal now, the house was never haunted. And I said, wait a minute, stop for a minute.
Yeah.
What does 3 o'clock in the morning mean to you and your wife? And there was silence. And he said, okay, what's going on? And I told him.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, I'm not going to go into the story. It's a long story, but yeah, we had kind of a ritual. Certainly we're young enough for it. And we got up every night in the middle of the night because that's a particular time that's important to us. And I guess we were a little bit loud. So let me ask you, Sunday night to Monday morning? He said, oh, we took one night off.
That's a good story.
Day of rest.
Yeah.
We gave them some suggestions of what to do. It turned out that they ended up moving their bed into that room so that they would, but apparently it sparked their love life a little bit. That's what I was told. So a friend of mine wrote the story up in Playgirl I've been in Playgirl magazine. He called me the Sexorcist.
Yes.
That's funny.
I think I would probably put that in your biography. That's a very interesting title.
It used to be. There's just, I have a longer bio that has it in.
Yeah. Yep.
Right next to Chocolatier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So we promised you that we would do a hard stop at 9:00. So I want to give you the last few minutes of the show. Is there anything that you're working on or want to talk about, or anything that you want to mention, or books that you're selling, or any of that kind of stuff? Now's your
I always have books to sell. A number of my books, I have several books that are out of print that I'm trying to bring back into print myself. But Amazon, if you go to Amazon and just run my name, you're going to find my books that are in print, which include Psychic Dreaming, a book I co-authored with the former director of the Stargate program, the remote viewing program.
I want to read that one.
ESP Wars East and West.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books I've ever worked on because it's not just about the psychic stuff.
Yeah.
We have from the remote viewing program, the story, and there's a lot of cool KGB stuff in it too. So if you're interested in spy stuff, it's really cool. I have a couple other books. The ghost hunting book you pulled up, the companion is Hauntings and Poltergeists. That's also available. And then I'm a co-author of 2 novels, 2 mystery novels so far in a new series, which I have a lot of influence on. It's called, the first one's called Near Death. The second's called After Life, 2 words. And my co-authors, Rich Hosick and Arnold Rudnick, and I crafted characters in the years ago when we were trying to sell a TV series. They're both ex-Hollywood writers, and we're hoping to go back and pitch this again once we have our 3rd book out, which will be out sometime in the next 6 months, called Far Sight, which will involve remote viewing. I write an afterword that includes the real stuff that the book takes off on from the book.
Cool.
So they're fun mysteries. We've gotten really great reviews on them.
Yep. So, and obviously people can probably just Amazon, go there.
Yeah, just put my name into Amazon and pull that up. Right. Yep. Right. Yep. And the other thing that I'm heavily involved with the Rhine Center. I'm president of the board. So, we're doing quite a bit as we can, especially the education center. The courses are relatively inexpensive compared to other courses that are out there. They're 8-week courses or 4-week classes. And also we do online webinars from time to time where we just ask for a donation. I'll be doing one, I think Friday, November 10th in the evening. And then I'm going to be doing an online and local, like a hybrid workshop in Durham, North Carolina, but it'll all be online as well on that Saturday, the 11th, November 11th as well. Otherwise, I'm working on a couple of potential books myself right now, but really focus on trying to get the other ones back into print before I even work on the book that I'm writing on dealing with everything that you need to know on how to best present the paranormal to everybody around you without seeming like you're crazy.
Yeah.
I need that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say this. I've noticed it's a way more acceptable topic than it used to be. Like,
it is, but people do have their skepticism level when you're sounding too much like some of the reality TV shows. People want to hear common sense. They want to have number one, they don't want to be frightened. That's important. But more importantly, they want to get information or be told things in ways that they can understand without a lot of jargon, and can be something that really kind of hits them in their lives the right way. And unfortunately, too many people who present this stuff, whether it's public speaking or otherwise, they go for the, not necessarily always the scare factor, but certainly the excitement factor, which you do want to be exciting. And that's one of the parts of the book is how to do public speaking in a way that will be exciting, even though your subject matter's not.
Yeah.
It sounds like a whole lot better than the current YouTube tactic of just putting demon in the title, because that that drives me insane. But that's I mean, they get a lot of views.
Well, of course, but that that comes from the media, and the media loves to do scare tactics because those sell better. Those movies do much better. I mean, there's another version of The Exorcist, I guess, a sequel to The Exorcist coming out again.
Yep. So this is another good question. Do you take volunteers for your research, Andrew?
It depends on the kind of volunteer. Certainly, we look for volunteers within the field quite a bit, and it really depends on the kind of volunteer. We certain organizations, the Forever Family Foundation, which works with spirit mediums, especially in the family grieving process, but also supports research in life after death. Looks for volunteers and people can contact us through the website that's there. The Rhine, if you're in Durham, North Carolina, or otherwise, we sometimes look for volunteers for that. I know that right now there's another organization that's having serious problems. It's a important educational organization called the Parapsychology Foundation, which is just simply parapsychology.org. And they're looking for help. We're financial. In fact, the Rhine Center is helping them financially as well, going to be helping them a little bit, but they're looking for that to preserve what they've been doing. And actually, they've been doing a lot of outreach for the decades, supported a lot of people, students and other people financially, and now they're in trouble. So that's another way to volunteer as well.
Cool. Appreciate that. Stephanie, you got one last quick question that we can get in 3 minutes?
Yeah, I guess if you had to suggest one thing or a series of things for somebody who is coming into the paranormal, what would be your best piece of advice to them?
So I would say either take a course from a reputable place like the Rhine Center. The University of Edinburgh has a course in their Kessler Unit of Parapsychology that anybody can take. There's a couple other of my colleagues who offer courses which are competing with ours, which is okay. But definitely, if you see courses, if you see any resources out there, even books, do check what their bio is. But more importantly, you can check with organizations like the Rhine Research Center. You can send email to the center. You can contact the Parapsychological Association. You can look at the membership list. Or the Society for Scientific Exploration. You can look to see if they are people who have an understanding of the science, if that's what you're going for. If it's experiential, it's a different story. But, there's a law out there in information world, which goes back to science fiction, called Sturgeon's Law, named after Theodore Sturgeon, who made this up. So the version here is, 90% of all information about the paranormal on the web and everywhere else is crap. Yeah. But then again, 90% of all information on the web is crap.
Yeah. Yep.
So you really need to be sort through. I think my books are a good starting point. Dean Radin is another person, Radin. Steve Parsons wrote a book called Ghostology, which I highly recommend. We use that in our course, especially if you're interested in technology and the equipment and stuff. Steve's the guy on the UK side. Okay,
cool. Well, again, like I said, we're gonna. It's a hard stop at 9, so we want to thank you for coming on again. I personally have I really didn't get to any of my questions very much. So, I mean, we would love to have you on again sometime and do a part 2, because there is so much more that you have to offer that we couldn't get to tonight. I mean, it's just not possible in a short show. So, or not short show, but I mean, that's the format is an hour, but I'm just saying there's way more to be discussed than what can happen in an hour. So, I thank you for coming on, and
thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
Yep. And everybody check out the ticker on the bottom and go to those places. And those that asked how to volunteer, obviously you heard what he just had to say. So look into that. And this is the awkward thing. I need to find a good ending, because you click end stream and then you click it again.